They set him up to fail. 5 grown men placed a $200 bet that a working-class single father would crumble the moment he sat across from a powerful CEO, a woman who commanded boardrooms, managed hundreds of employees, and hadn't needed anyone in years. They called it a blind date. It was never that. It was a trap built from cruelty and boredom, designed to make 2 decent people feel small for the entertainment of men who had nothing better to do on a Friday night. What those men never counted on was Wesley Hart refusing to play along. This story already has you leaning forward. You're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because every week we bring you stories that will make you feel something real. Drop a comment below and tell us what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. And please hit the like button before we go any further, because stories like this one deserve to be seen. Settle in, because what happened inside Billionaire house that rainy Friday night is something I still think about. The rain had been falling since noon, the kind of slow gray drizzle that made everything in the city feel heavier than it actually was. By 6 o'clock, the streets outside the Billionaire house reflected the restaurant's amber lights in long, distorted streaks across the wet pavement, and the doorman out front had already held his umbrella open for a dozen well-dressed couples who swept inside without making eye contact. Wesley Hart parked his truck 3 blocks away because the lot beside the restaurant charged $18 for the first hour, and $18 was not something he spent keen kit parking. No, he sat in the cab for a moment after cutting the engine. Truck smelled like WD-40, and the pine air freshener Mila had picked out from the gas station 2 months ago, the one shaped like a little tree that had long since stopped smelling like pine, but that neither of them had the heart to take down. There was a crescent-shaped wrench on the passenger seat. He kept forgetting to move back to the toolbox, and drawing of a purple horse on a folded piece of notebook paper that Mila had left behind that morning, presumably on purpose because she liked the idea of him carrying something of hers. He looked at himself in the rear-view mirror. Yep, he was wearing the navy dress shirt he kept for situations that called for effort. Yep, it was pressed. He'd done it himself that morning before the laundry got away from him and tucked into dark slacks that still fit reasonably, even though he'd bought them 3 years ago. His boots were clean. His face was shaved. His hair was combed back, the way Mila always told him looked handsome, though Mila was 8 and also thought macaroni art was museum-worthy, so he tried not to let her opinion carry too much weight in either direction. He didn't feel nervous, exactly. He felt the particular kind of careful that came with not fully trusting a situation. Nettons, Travis Barlow had approached him 2 days earlier in the break room, while Wesley was eating a sandwich and reading nothing in particular on his phone. Travis was one of those men who was friendly in the specific way that required an audience. His jokes were funnier. When people were watching, his generosity always came with a story attached to it. Wesley had worked alongside him for 3 years, and in that time had developed a quiet, reliable instinct to keep a certain distance. Hey, listen, Travis had sat down across from him without being invited. You know how you're always saying you never get out anymore? Wesley looked up. I don't think I've ever said that. You've implied it. I haven't. Whatever, man. I've got something for you. Travis leaned in like he was sharing something classified. There's this woman. She asked a friend of mine about you. Wanted to know if you were single. Wesley had put down the sandwich. He had learned a long time ago to be cautious about anything Travis introduced with that particular leaned-forward, lowered voice energy. It was the same energy he used when he was about to make someone the butt of something. The trick was that you never quite knew what the something was until you were already in the middle of it. What woman? Wesley asked. Her name's Lena. She's great. Down to earth, has a kid. Travis waved a hand like the details were secondary. She works in business. Real smart. I told her about you and she seemed interested. She asked if you'd meet her at Billionaire House Friday. Wesley looked at him steadily. Women don't ask men out through Travis Barlow. Maybe she's progressive. Travis grinned. Come on, man. When's the last time you went on a date? Mila's with your mother on Friday. You've got nothing going on. Go have dinner with a real person. Worst case, you eat a good meal. Against his better judgment, Wesley went. He didn't go because he trusted Travis. He went because there was a small, stubborn part of him was tired of being the person who stayed home when the rain fell. He was 32 years old. Mila was 8. The math on how long he'd been doing this alone was not something he liked to calculate, but it lived quietly in the back of his mind, like a number on a bill he kept putting off. He walked the 3 blocks to Bellmere House with his hands in his pockets and rain tapping lightly against his shoulders. The hostess inside had a smile that seemed to have been assembled very deliberately and smiled him toward a table near the center of the room before he finished explaining he was meeting someone. The restaurant was warm and full. On every table, white linens that would have made him nervous about the breadbasket under ordinary circumstances. He scanned the room out of habit. Maintenance work had made him observant in ways that made him feel like he was always looking for something that needed fixing, and that's when he saw her. She was sitting alone at a table positioned. He registered slowly, in a way that made her visible from virtually every angle in the room. Her hair was dark, pulled back loosely, and she was looking at the menu with the focused attention of someone trying to appear unbothered while being quite bothered. She was wearing a dark blazer over a simple top, and she had the posture of someone who had spent years learning to take up space in rooms that didn't automatically make space for her. She was, objectively speaking, a woman who would turn heads in any room she walked into. She was also, objectively speaking, being watched by 4 men in a corner booth who were already failing to contain themselves. Wesley stopped. He didn't look at the booth. He kept his expression level and let his eyes move around the room the way he did when he was assessing a problem, slow, thorough, without telegraphing what he'd found. Travis was there, Heatet, in the corner, with 4 other guys from the hotel, Derek, Paul, 2 others from the evening shift, whose names he'd never bothered to learn, because they had never given him a reason to learn them. They were trying to look casual and failing at it in the specific way people failed at things they thought were clever. Wesley understood the setup in about 4 seconds. His first instinct was to leave. He could be back at his truck before the hostess even noticed, could drive home, could make the microwave pasta Mila had suggested he keep in the cabinet for nights like this, could watch the game and pretend this hadn't happened. He didn't owe Travis Barlow anything. He definitely didn't owe the woman at that table anything. Then he looked at her again. She was sitting there alone, in the most exposed seat in a full restaurant, under what he now understood was deliberate observation, waiting for a man she had presumably been told was interested in her. And when that man didn't show or showed and turned around, she would be left sitting there trying to figure out part of herself had been the problem. He knew what that kind of confusion felt like, even if the circumstances were different. He walked to the table. She looked up when he arrived, and something flashed across her face that she controlled quickly. Surprise, maybe, or the specific relief of not having been stood up, followed immediately by the careful recalibration of a woman who had taught herself not to show too much too soon. He said yes. She closed the menu. You must be Wesley. I am. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down before he'd fully decided what he was going to say next. Up close, she looked tired in the way that had nothing to do with sleep, the kind of tired that accumulated from being the person in every room who was expected to hold it together regardless of what that cost. He put his hands flat on the table, and he told her the truth. I'm going to be straightforward with you about something, he said, keeping his voice low and even. And I want you to know before I say it that I had nothing to do with it. She went very still. With what? He tilted his head almost imperceptibly toward the corner booth. 4 men I work with are sitting over there, including the man who told me about this date. He watched her take that in. What they told you, or how they arranged this. But based on the way they're sitting over there, trying not to look like they're watching us, this wasn't set up in good faith. Lena didn't turn toward the booth. She kept her eyes on him, and he watched something move behind them, not humiliation. Exactly. The recognition of a pattern she'd encountered before. A joke, she said. Yeah. He didn't try to soften it. Think so. She was quiet for a moment. Her hands were folded on the table, and she looked down at them briefly before looking back up. How long have you known? Since I walked in and you sat down anyway. I didn't want you thinking you were the reason I left. Landed somewhere. He could see it, a small shift, something behind the careful composure she was wearing like a uniform. She looked at him differently for a fraction of a second before she put the composure back on. You could still leave. I wouldn't blame you. He glanced at the menu. What's good here? She stared at him. Are you serious? I walked 3 blocks in the rain and paid nothing for parking, so I'm committed to the evening, whether it's awkward or not. He looked up from the menu. But genuinely, if you'd rather go, I'll walk you to your car. Argument. Lena looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone trying to determine whether a stranger was sincere or performing sincerity, a distinction she had spent years learning to identify, because in her world, the gap between the two was where things went wrong. The salmon is supposed to be good, she said finally. Wesley nodded. Then I'll start there. They were 8 minutes into an actual conversation. She'd asked how he knew the men in the corner booth. He'd explained the hotel. She'd asked what he did there. He'd said maintenance. She hadn't flinched when Travis stood up. Wesley saw it happening in his peripheral vision. He kept his attention on Lena. He tracked Travis across the room with the corner of his eye, the way he tracked a slow pipe leak present, acknowledged, yet requiring full attention. Travis arrived at the table with the particular confidence of a man who had never been genuinely embarrassed and therefore had no instinct for how quickly that could change. Travis said, "Look at this." Lena looked up at him with the expression of someone who had been interrupted in the middle of something that was actually going fine. "Thank you very much." "Travis," Wesley said, "I didn't think you'd actually stay." Travis said it to Wesley. His eyes moved to Lena when he said it, checking her reaction, already calculating. "I figured once you saw the table, you'd—" He stopped himself, grinned. "I'm glad you made it. Introductions, right? Lena, this is Wesley. Wesley's one of our guys at the hotel. Maintenance. Good with a wrench." The last sentence had a particular weight to it that wasn't in any of the individual words. He's got a little girl, 8 years old. Single dad. Works a lot of overtime, not the paid kind, if you know what I mean. Wesley said nothing. Travis kept going, warming to it now. His apartment's not far from the hotel, actually. Little place over on Cardwell Street. You know Cardwell? He looked at Lena. Probably not your side of town. He laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that required no audience participation. Point is good guy. Salt of the earth. Just a different kind of life than yours, you know? Different world. He spread his hands. I thought it might be an interesting conversation. Table was quiet. Somewhere behind Travis, Wesley could see the corner booth watching. He could also see, without looking directly, that the people at the 2 nearest tables had gone quieter than they'd been before. Lena set down her water glass with a care that suggested she was choosing very deliberately not to set it down hard. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was composed in the way that things were composed right before they weren't. "I didn't catch your name." Travis looked mildly surprised to be addressed. Travis. Travis. She nodded once. "What is it that you do at the hotel?" "Guest services management. And you spent your Friday night arranging a setup to watch your coworker feel uncomfortable." Travis has opened his mouth. "Because I want to make sure I understand," Lena continued, still in that same even tone. "You selected a restaurant, found a woman to invite, convinced Wesley to come, and then sat in a corner booth to watch. Is that right?" It was just... I know what it was. She looked at him without warmth or hostility, which was somehow worse than either. "I've been in boardrooms with men like you for 12 years. Embarrass me, Travis. And Wesley's job doesn't embarrass me." She paused. "Your behavior does." The nearest table had definitely stopped pretending to have their own conversation. Travis shifted his weight. The grin had contracted into something smaller and less confident. "I was just, how much?" Wesley said. Travis looked at him. "Bet." Wesley's voice was the same as it had always been, not raised, not hard, just present and direct. "How much money did you put on this?" The silence stretched out for about 4 seconds, which is a very long time when everyone in the vicinity is listening. $200, Travis said. He seemed to realize as he said it that he should have lied, but the question had come too directly and too quietly. The way questions did when the person asking already knew the answer and just wanted to hear you say it. "No." Wesley nodded slowly. 5 of you put $200 on how badly this evening would go. It wasn't a question. Travis didn't answer it like one. The corner booth was no longer watching with entertainment. 3 of the 4 men in it had found something extremely interesting to look at in other parts of the restaurant. Calvin Mercer, the restaurant manager, a compact, attentive man in his 50s who had been working the floor at Bellmere House for 16 years and who had, in that time, yes, developed an excellent instinct for which situations required his personal presence at the table, with the noiseless efficiency of someone who had been watching for 30 seconds and had already made up his mind. "Is everything all right at this table?" he asked. "Everything's fine with us," Wesley said, without looking away from Travis. This gentleman was just leaving. Travis looked at Calvin, then at Lena, then at Wesley. The math of the moment had changed substantially from what it had been 30 seconds ago, and the corner booth had become much less of an asset than it had seemed when he'd pushed his chair back. "Yeah," Travis said. "I was just stopped." "Yeah." He walked back to the corner booth with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders doing something complicated. Calvin looked at Wesley and Lena. "I'm very sorry you were interrupted," he said. "Can I get you anything? Fresh water, perhaps?" "We're fine," Lena said. "Thank you." Calvin nodded once and moved away, but he didn't move far. The restaurant settled back into itself. Restaurants did after the air pressure of an interruption equalized. Conversations resumed. Silverware clinked against plates. Lena picked up her water glass again and held it without drinking, looking at the table. "Was going to keep going," she said. Not quite Wesley, not quite to herself. Probably. He looked at the menu again, even though he'd already decided on the salmon. He wasn't sure why he kept looking at it. Old habit give people a moment without making them feel observed. "You all right?" "Yes." Then, after a beat, "I'm annoyed at myself for caring." He looked up. "Why?" "Because I shouldn't still be surprised by this kind of thing." She set the glass down. "I run a company with 400 employees. I sit across from people in meetings who think I got where I am because of luck or a lawsuit, or because somebody handed me something." She stopped. "How to handle Travis Barlow? I've handled 100 of them." She shook her head, a small tight motion. "I wanted tonight to be normal." Wesley considered that. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and it's okay if you don't answer it." She waited. "When Travis was talking the apartment on Cardwell, the overtime, all of it, what did you actually think?" She looked at him directly, the way she hadn't quite looked at him before. "I thought he was trying to make me embarrassed to be sitting here." A pause. I wasn't asking about him." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes, then, with a kind of honesty that seemed to arrive by conscious decision, I thought it must have taken something to sit down anyway. What it was. It didn't take much," he said. "Took more than you're giving it credit for." He didn't argue the point. He looked back at the menu. "I'm going with the salmon," he said. "You want to tell me about what you run." And like that, not smoothly, not perfectly, with the corner booth still visible at the edge of the room and the memory of Travis Barlow's voice still hanging faintly in the air between them, the evening became something that belonged to the 2 of them, rather than the 5 men who had tried to script it. Her name was Lena Marlowe. She ran Marlowe Digital Consulting, which she had built from a 2-person operation working out of a second bedroom 8 years ago into a firm that now occupied 3 floors of a downtown office building and managed infrastructure. Systems for corporations that most people had heard of. She talked about it the way people talked about children they were proud of, but genuinely exhausted by, with a love that was entirely real, and a weariness that was equally real. "I started it when Owen was 3 months old," she said. "My ex-husband thought it was a hobby." She said ex-husband with the specific neutral weight of someone who had long since processed the emotion attached to those words and now just carried them as fact. He wasn't wrong that it started as a project. He was wrong about where it was going. Where did he think it was going? Nowhere that would interfere with anything that mattered to him. She picked up her fork. That turned out to be the problem. Wesley nodded. He understood that particular shape of problem, the shape of someone being seen incorrectly by a person who should have known better. "How old's Owen now?" he asked. 6, and her voice changed slightly, in the way that voices changed when they arrived at something genuinely good. "He's obsessed with dinosaurs right now. Specifically the Cretaceous period, which he will explain to you, at length, if you allow him to." Wesley smiled, a real one. The first one of the evening that had nothing to do with managing the situation. As in a phase where she corrects my pronunciation of everything. She's 8. She got a dictionary for her birthday, and she's been using it as a weapon. Lena laughed. Not the polished laugh of someone networking, the actual kind. The one that happened before she could decide whether to deploy it. Owen corrected my spelling in a text message last week. Can't tie his shoes, but he can spell pterodactyl. Silent P, Wesley said. Don't get him started. The dinner arrived. The salmon was, in fact, good. Yes, he'd intervened, ordered risotto, and she ate it without the specific performance of watching what she ate that he had observed in other women who had agreed to dinner with strangers and spent the whole time managing their presentation. She just ate it because she was hungry and it was good, and something about that was immediately uncomplicated, in a way the entire evening hadn't been until now. From the corner booth, there was no more noise. Wesley glanced over once and found the table empty at some point. While they'd been talking, no, Travis and the others had left, either voluntarily or with Calvin's assistance, and Wesley found he didn't much care which. Calvin himself stopped by the table as they were finishing. I want to apologize again for the interruption earlier, he said. Tonight's meal is on the house. Please don't argue with me about it. Wesley started to argue with him about it. Please, Calvin said with the firmness of a man who had decided. Lena caught Wesley's eye from across the table with an expression that said very clearly, let the man be generous. It costs you nothing. Wesley settled back. Thank you, he said. Calvin nodded and moved on. Was watching Wesley with the particular tension of someone cataloging small details. You were going to insist on paying, she said. I don't like owing things. He wasn't asking for anything in return. I know. He turned his water glass in his hand. It's a habit. She understood that, he thought. Maybe more than most people would have. They stayed for coffee after the plates were cleared, which was something neither of them had planned on, which was perhaps the point. Told him about the divorce. Not the whole of it, that was not a first dinner story. And she was self-aware enough to know it, but the parts that had shaped how she moved through the world now. Particular loneliness of being a woman who was supposed to have it all together, and therefore was as assumed not to need anything. The dates that had followed, which had mostly fallen into 2 categories, men who wanted access to what she'd built, and men who resented her for having built it. The occasional 3rd category, which was men who were perfectly fine, and with whom she had absolutely nothing to talk about, which was somehow the worst category of all. Wesley told her about Mila's mother, about the years that had followed, the learning curve of being a single father, the pediatric appointments and school pickups and parent-teacher conferences, where he was always the only father in the room, and sometimes the teachers addressed him like he was a substitute for the person who was supposed to be there. About emergency maintenance calls at 2 in the morning and the guilt of leaving Mila with a neighbor who was always kind about it, but whom Wesley always called twice to confirm. About the specific financial arithmetic of a single income and a growing child, and the way you stopped thinking about what you wanted and just thought about what was needed. You're not embarrassed, she said, after a while. He looked at her. By what? Any of it. The truck, the overtime, the apartment. She wasn't saying it critically. She was saying it like she was noting something real. Travis tried to use all of it like it was something to be ashamed of. Travis has never fixed an elevator, Wesley said. He doesn't know what the job is. What is the job? He thought about it. People depend on things working. They don't think about it until they don't work. When the elevator breaks on the 14th floor, and there are guests up there, and the housekeeping staff can't get their carts up, and the kitchen can't send room service, everybody needs it working. Nobody thought about it when it was. He set down his cup. I'm the person who makes it work. That's the job. A pause. I don't need it to be more than that. Lena looked at him for a moment without saying anything. That's not nothing, she said. I know it isn't. Outside, through the tall windows of Billionaire House, the rain had eased to something lighter. The reflections on the pavement were steadier now, less distorted. The doorman was talking to someone on his phone, and a couple was leaving with their arms linked, a taxi already pulling to the curb. Wesley looked at the check when it arrived, still an instinct, even after Calvin's offer. and found it already zeroed out, which he folded and set aside. "I want to ask you something," Lena said, turning her coffee cup in her hands. "And you don't have to answer it." He waited. "Why did you actually stay?" He considered being brief about it. He considered the version where he said something that was true, but not the whole truth, that he'd been curious, or that the salmon had sounded good, or that he didn't drive 3 blocks in the rain to turn around. All of those things were true. He went with the whole truth instead. Because you were sitting at that table alone, and you didn't know yet what kind of night it was going to be. Thought about what it would feel like to be the woman left sitting at that table when the man turned around and walked back out the door. And you would have spent the rest of the evening thinking it was you. He looked at her steadily. "You're not anyone's last option. I didn't want you leaving here thinking you were." The restaurant was quiet around them, not the held-breath quiet of the interruption. Earlier, just the ordinary quiet of an evening winding down, tables clearing, the kitchen sounds settling. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her coffee cup, which was mostly empty, and held it as though she'd forgotten she was holding it. "Kay," she said. It was not a big word, but she said it in a way that carried something inside it, something she'd put down from her shoulders and was not immediately picking back up. Wesley signaled for the check they didn't need to pay, out of habit, and then remembered, and put his hand back on the table. Outside, the rain had nearly stopped. The Monday after the dinner at Billionaire house, Wesley arrived at work 17 minutes early, which was not unusual, and found Travis Barlow already in the break room, which also was not unusual, except that Travis was sitting with Derek and Paul, and the energy in the room had the specific compressed quality of people who had been talking about something and stopped when the door opened. Wesley got his coffee. He didn't acknowledge the pause. He read the maintenance log from the weekend shift, a stuck elevator door on the 9th floor that had been temporarily fixed and needed a proper follow-up, a leaking pipe coupling in the utility corridor on floor 3, a broken towel warmer in suite 1408 that a guest had complained about twice. He made notes in his own handwriting in the small spiral notebook he kept in his chest pocket, finished the coffee, rinsed the cup, and left the break room without having said a word to any of them. This was apparently worse than anything he could have said. He knew this because Derek caught up to him in the service corridor 20 minutes later with the urgent, slightly breathless manner of someone delivering information they couldn't quite decide was good or bad. "Travis is telling people you got lucky," Derek said. Wesley crouched down in front of the pipe coupling and opened his bag. "Lucky how?" "He's saying the woman felt sorry for you, that she stayed out of pity." Wesley selected a wrench. Derek shifted his weight. Is that what happened? Because Travis is saying, "I heard you the first time." Wesley examined the coupling. The repair from the previous shift was functional but sloppy. Whoever had done it had used the wrong tape, and the whole thing would need to be properly resealed. "Are you asking me because you're curious or because Travis sent you to find out?" Derek was quiet for a beat too long. "Go back to work," Wesley said, not unkindly. Derek went. Wesley spent the next 40 minutes on the coupling, alone in the corridor with the sound of pipes and the distant hum of the building's HVAC system. Yes, he'd intervened, and he thought about the previous Friday night in the way that you thought about something you weren't entirely sure how to categorize yet. It had been good. That was the plainest and most accurate word for it. Perfect. Nothing was perfect. And the presence of Travis and the corner booth had made the first part of the evening something they'd had to climb out of, rather than start from. But good in the specific way that things were good when they surprised you. Lena had given him her card when they said goodnight outside the restaurant. A simple card, just her name and a number written on the back in ballpoint pen, the front having the Marlowe Digital Consulting logo in clean sans serif type. She'd handed it over with the air of someone doing something they'd decided on, rather than something they'd been carried into by the momentum of a nice evening, which he'd noted. He hadn't called yet. He wasn't sure what the right amount of time was to wait, which was a problem he hadn't had to think about in years. He was mildly annoyed at himself for thinking about it now, while lying on the floor of a utility corridor trying to get a proper seal on a pipe coupling that some night shift guy had bodged together with the wrong materials. He finished the repair, tested it, packed his bag, and moved on to the 9th floor. Travis was waiting for him at the elevator bank. Not coincidentally, Wesley could see that immediately. Travis was standing there with his arms crossed and his guest services lanyard hanging from his neck. And he had the look of someone who had rehearsed what he was going to say and was now slightly irritated that the person he'd rehearsed it for hadn't arrived with more fanfare. "We should talk," Travis said. "I've got an elevator door to look at," Wesley said. "It'll take 2 minutes." Wesley stopped in front of the elevator panel and crouched to look at the lower guide rail. "You've got 2 minutes." Travis uncrossed his arms. "I feel like Friday got blown out of proportion." Wesley ran his fingers along the rail, found the slight bend he expected, and marked the location. $200 is not out of proportion. That's a considered investment. It was a joke. You keep saying that. Wesley stood and pressed the call button, watching the door open and checking the gap on the left side. There it was, the door was catching on a worn guide shoe, which was exactly what he'd expected. A joke is something both people are in on. "Look, I didn't think you'd actually." "Travis." Wesley looked at him directly for the first time since the elevator bank. "I'm not angry at you. I want you to understand that, because I think you came here expecting a fight, and I'm not going to give you one. But I'm also not going to tell you it was fine, because it wasn't." He turned back to the door. "Put me and a woman I'd never met in a room and invited people to laugh at us. That's what happened. Call it what you want." Travis was quiet for a moment. "She's not exactly your type." Wesley looked up. "My type." "What I mean, I genuinely don't." Travis did the thing where he made a vague gesture that was supposed to convey more than he was saying. She runs a company. She's in a different world. I'm not saying that to be what? I'm just saying. It was one dinner. People like her don't." He stopped. "People like her don't what?" Wesley waited. Travis didn't finish the sentence, which told Wesley everything that sentence would have contained. "I'm going to need about 2 hours on this door," Wesley said. "Tell whoever's scheduling that the elevator's going to be out of service until this afternoon." He did not wait for Travis's response. He opened his bag and got to work. The week passed the way work weeks passed, when you had a full maintenance log and a daughter who needed help with a school project on the water cycle, which turned out to require more blue and green construction paper than Wesley had anticipated, and 2 trips to the craft store, the second of which Mila supervised with the authority of someone who had been waiting her entire 8 years for the opportunity to be in charge of a shopping cart. "You got the wrong blue last time," she said, examining a sheet of paper, with the seriousness of a quality inspector. "This is sky blue. The ocean is different. The ocean is also blue, Dad." She put the paper back and selected another one. "Ocean is specifically a deeper blue. Mrs. Cartwright said so." Wesley accepted the correction. He was accustomed to them. On Wednesday evening, after Mila was in bed and the water cycle project was drying on the kitchen table, looking genuinely pretty good given the materials available, Wesley sat at the kitchen table with his phone and Lena's card and thought about it for about 3 minutes before he called. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "I was wondering if you were going to use that," she said, which told him she'd seen the number and already guessed it was him, which told him she hadn't deleted it, which told him something. "I was working through the appropriate waiting period," he said. "How long did you land on?" "Apparently 5 days. That's very deliberate for a man who sat across from a stranger in a sabotage dinner." "I do most things deliberately," he said. "It's a character flaw." She laughed, and it was the same laugh as Friday, the real one that arrived before she could intervene. "How was your week?" He told her the elevator door and the pipe coupling and the craft store visit and the water cycle project in that order. She told him about a difficult board meeting on Tuesday and Owen's dinosaur presentation at school, which he had apparently delivered with such thoroughness that his teacher had to gently redirect the class after 14 minutes because they had moved on from dinosaurs, and she had a math lesson planned. She said he was very impressive, Lena said. Then she said she hoped he'd find a way to channel it toward the curriculum. "That's a polite way of saying he's too much," Wesley said. "He's exactly enough," she said, and the way she said it was without any performance at all, just a mother, stating a fact she had decided was not up for debate. He understood that feeling completely. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes, which surprised both of them, though neither said so out loud. The following Friday, Travis came to find Wesley in the maintenance workshop, which was in the basement of the hotel and which Travis had never previously visited in the 3 years they'd worked together. He came in with the slightly disoriented air of someone who had taken a wrong turn and ended up somewhere he hadn't intended. Wesley was at the workbench, replacing the heating element in a portable appliance from one of the suites. He didn't look up. "I heard you called her," Travis said. Wesley kept working. "How'd you hear that?" Derek heard it from the afternoon desk girl, who heard it from... Travis waved a hand. "Hotels have terrible privacy." "Yeah." Wesley tested the connection. "I called her." Travis leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, in the way that he apparently thought projected ease, but actually projected someone who needed a doorframe to lean against. "And what? And how did it go?" Wesley looked up at him. "Are you asking because you're genuinely curious, or because you're keeping score?" Travis considered this with more honesty than Wesley expected. "Probably." "Okay." Wesley set down the tool. "It went fine. We talked for a while. She's interesting." He paused. "She's also not a storyline, Travis. She's a person." "She's a person. Do you?" Travis was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face that might have been genuine discomfort, not shame, exactly, which would have required more self-reflection than Travis typically engaged in. Kind of unease at finding that his expectations had not played out the way he'd calculated. "I didn't think you'd actually stay at that table," he said finally. "You said that already. I mean..." He stopped. "I don't know what I mean." "I thought she'd send me home?" Wesley suggested. Travis didn't answer, which was itself an answer. "She almost did," Wesley said. "She gave me the option." He picked up the tool again. "I didn't take it." Travis looked at him for a moment. "Why not?" Wesley considered how to explain something that was simple, but didn't feel simple when you tried to put language to it. "'Cause she deserved a better evening than the one you arranged for her," he said. "And so did I." Travis nodded slowly. He uncrossed his arms, looked at the floor briefly, and then looked back up. $200 came from Derek's end of it, mostly. "For the record, I don't care about the money." "I know. Another stop. I don't know why I told you that." "Probably because it makes you feel slightly better about your role in it," Wesley said. Harshly, just accurately. "You can tell Derek it doesn't matter either way." Travis left without saying anything else. Wesley finished the heating element, tested it twice, logged the repair, and went upstairs to check on a reported noise in the HVAC duct in room 712. 3 weeks after the dinner at Billionaire House, on a Saturday morning when Mila was at a birthday party for a classmate, and Wesley had the apartment to himself for 4 hours. He met Lena at a diner called Patty's on the corner of Renner and 4th. She had suggested it. He had expected, given everything he knew about her world, that she might suggest somewhere nicer, another Billionaire House-type place, a weekend brunch spot with a wait list and a prefix menu. Instead, she'd said, "There's a diner near where I grew up. Coffee is mediocre, but the pie is not. I haven't been in probably 3 years. Would you want to go there?" He had said yes before she finished the sentence. Patty's was the kind of place that had a laminated menu with photographs of the food, which was Wesley's personal benchmark for a diner worth visiting. The booths were vinyl, faded from red to a sort of dusty rose, and the coffee arrived in white ceramic mugs without anyone asking. Yes, he'd made. There was a small television mounted above the counter tuned to a weather broadcast with the sound off, and a man in his 70s at the far end of the counter who appeared to be on his 3rd cup and in no hurry to be anywhere, was already there when Wesley arrived, 5 minutes early, which was apparently her default. She was wearing jeans and a plain, dark sweater and no blazer, and she looked so different from the woman at Billionaire House, not lesser. Just undone in the specific way that people were undone when they weren't performing anything that Wesley stopped for just a moment at the entrance before sliding into the booth across from her. "You got here before me," he said. "I'm always early," she said. "Problem. I'm also always early. It's fine." "Then we're incompatible," she said. "Two people who are always early cancel each other out. Or they're never late," he said. Glass half full. She smiled at that, and something in the booth relaxed. Coffee arrived. It was not exceptional coffee, but it was hot and it came in a mug that was the right size, which counted for something. They ordered pie after approximately 4 minutes of deliberation. Apple for him, something the menu called Blueberry Mountain for her, which turned out to be a regular slice of blueberry pie with no apparent connection to mountains. I used to come here with my mother, Lena said, pulling a small plate of creamer containers toward herself. Every Saturday after her shift at the hospital. She was a night nurse. She'd finish at 6 in the morning, sleep until noon, and then she'd come pick me up from wherever I was, and we'd come here for pie. And she'd tell me about whatever had happened that week at work. She peeled back the foil of a creamer. She never made it dramatic. Just told me like it was any other job. Think she was trying to show me that hard work was just, she stopped, slightly. Not exceptional, just what you did. Wesley wrapped his hands around the mug. Where is she now? Retired. She lives in Savannah. She calls Owen every Sunday and talks to him for 30 minutes about whatever he's interested in at that particular moment. Right now that's still dinosaurs, so. A half smile. She knows a lot about dinosaurs now. Wesley smiled. Went through a phase with volcanic eruptions. My mother knows more about pyroclastic flow than she ever wanted to. Your mother watches Mila sometimes? When I need her to. She's about 40 minutes away. He turned the mug in his hands. Zeus, she didn't love the single father arrangement when it started. Because she had a problem with it more, because she worried about me. He paused. She doesn't say much anymore. She just shows up when I call. That's more than most people do. Lena looked at him. How often do you let yourself need people? He wasn't expecting the question to land quite the way it did. He thought about it for a moment, genuinely. Not often enough, probably, he said. It's easier to be the person people need than to need them back. Yes, she said, it is. The ways she said it had the quality of someone confirming something they had already found out the hard way. The pie arrived. The Blueberry Mountain was, in fact, a straightforward slice, with nothing mountain-like about it, but excellent filling. And Wesley's apple was the kind that had been made from actual apples, rather than the reconstituted filling that came out of a can, which he could always tell. They ate for a while without filling the quiet artificially, which was something Wesley noticed, because the absence of forced conversation was its own kind of information about a person. Can I tell you something? Lena said, setting down her fork. Yeah. When you called Wednesday night, I had already decided that if you didn't call by end of the week, I was going to let it go. She looked at the table briefly. Because I didn't want to talk to you. Because I'm very practiced at letting things go before they have the chance to not work out. She looked back up. I wanted you to know that, because I think if we're going to, I don't know what this is yet. If it's going to be anything, it should probably start with me not pretending I'm more relaxed about it than I am. Wesley put down his fork too. He looked at her across the laminated tabletop with its slightly sticky surface and the coffee ring that had been there before they arrived. I called because I wanted to, he said. Not because I was following a script or because the evening was interesting, or because of anything other than I wanted to talk to you again. I'm also not very relaxed about it. He paused. I haven't done this in a long time. Neither have I. And both of our kids are going to need to be part of whatever this is, eventually. That's not nothing. No, she agreed, it isn't. And you run a company, and I fix elevators, and there are going to be people in your world who have something to say about that. There are going to be people in my worlds who have something to say about everything, she said. That stopped being my problem about 5 years ago. He looked at her. Did it really? She considered. Maybe 70%. That's honest. I'm trying to be. Outside the window of Patty's, the Saturday morning moved past a woman walking 2 dogs, a kid on a bike doing something inadvisable on the curb, a delivery van idling at the corner. Normal Saturday. Wesley thought about the corner booth at Bellmere House 3 weeks ago and the distance between that Friday night and this Saturday morning, and how much had shifted in the space of a few weeks, and a couple of phone calls, and one unexceptional cup of coffee. He thought about Travis saying people like her, and leaving the rest of the sentence incomplete. He thought about the kind of man who would sit in a corner booth and watch 2 strangers try to survive an evening designed to embarrass them, and the $200 that represented that kind of thinking and how little any of that seemed to matter in a vinyl booth at Patty's Diner with the mediocre coffee and the surprisingly good apple pie. 50-30 on relaxed, he said finally. I'll take those odds. She looked at him for a moment, and then she picked up her fork and went back to the Blueberry Mountain, which was regular blueberry pie and nothing else, was completely fine. They stayed at Patty's for another hour and a half, which was an hour longer than either of them had planned. The man at the end of the counter finished his third coffee and ordered a fourth. Weather on the television cycled through to the next segment. Their mugs were refilled twice without anyone making it a ceremony. When they finally left, the Saturday was bright and slightly cold, the kind of clear fall day that made everything look sharper than it actually was. They stood on the sidewalk outside Patty's with the comfortable awkwardness of two people who have spent a good morning together and are now not quite sure how to end it without making it seem like they're trying to end it. Gets picked up at 3, Wesley said. Owen is with his father today until 6, Lena said. They both recognize the mutual establishing of timelines for what it was, which was the adult version of not having to be anywhere right this second, if the other person also didn't have to be anywhere right this second. There's a decent hardware store 2 blocks from here, Wesley said. I've been meaning to get a new set of hex keys. If you have absolutely nothing else to do on a Saturday morning. Looked at him. You're asking me to go to a hardware store. I'm suggesting it as an option. She considered this the CEO in jeans, considering a hardware store on a Saturday, which was, Wesley was aware, a conventional second date suggestion by any measure. Would you explain what hex keys are? In considerable detail, he said. Yes, she said. Okay. They walked the 2 blocks to the hardware store, which was the kind of old neighborhood place that still had wooden bins for nails, sold by weight and a layout that hadn't changed in 30 years. Wesley found the hex keys and explained them in the considerable detail he had promised, and Lena listened with genuine attention, asking questions that were better than he expected, not pretending to know things she didn't, but also not pretending to be less intelligent than she was, which was its own particular kind of respect. She bought a small level because she had a picture in Owen's room that had been slightly crooked for 4 months, and every time she walked past it, it bothered her, and she had kept meaning to fix it and kept not fixing it for reasons she could not entirely explain. Could fix that, Wesley said. I know you could, she said. I can also fix it. I just needed a level. You're right, he said. Sorry. She looked at him, and something warm moved across her face. Apologized immediately. Because I was wrong immediately. She turned the level over in her hands. Most men I've dated would have insisted they were being helpful. Most men you've dated, by your own account, were a specific kind of problem, he said. She laughed, and it was again the real laugh, the one that got there before she could make a decision about it. Fair enough, she said. They walked back out into the Saturday. The street was busier now than it had been an hour ago, the morning crowd giving way to the full midday movement of a neighborhood going about its weekend. Wesley had the hex keys in a small paper bag. Lena had the level tucked under her arm. There was nothing extraordinary about any of it. No grand gesture, no dramatic moment, no demonstration of wealth or status, or the absence of either. Just 2 people and a hardware store and a slightly crooked picture in a 6-year-old's bedroom. Wesley thought about the bet. Travis Barlow had placed $200 on failure. Thought about Travis in the corridor earlier that week, saying he didn't know why he'd said what he'd said. He thought about Lena across the laminated table at Patty's, saying she had been ready to let it go by end of the week. He was glad he had called on Wednesday. At the corner of Renner and 4th, Lena looked at the level under her arm and then at him. Picture's been crooked for 4 months, she said. Never even mentions it. Kids don't always notice the things we think they notice, Wesley said. She agreed. They notice other things instead. She walked to her car, which was parked half a block down. Wesley watched her go. In any particular way. Just the way you watch someone who had become, in the course of a few weeks, someone you were glad to know. Then he walked back to his truck, 3 blocks away, past the hardware store and Patty's in the corner where the delivery van had been idling earlier. Paper bag with the hex keys swung lightly in his hand, and the fall air was cold and clear, and Mila would be done with the birthday party in 2 hours. The day had a good, ordinary weight to it. He wasn't going to do anything with that feeling, except hold on to it carefully, the way you held on to things that had just started to mean something and were therefore still possible to break. The level worked. Lena sent him a photograph 3 days after the hardware store visit, just a picture of Owen's bedroom wall, the framed poster of a triceratops hanging perfectly straight. Caption. Explanation. Wesley looked at it for a moment and then typed back, "Good level." She sent a single laughing emoji, which was the most emoji he had seen from her in any context, and he took that as a reasonable indicator of mood. What they were doing did not yet have a name, which was fine with both of them, or at least fine with Wesley and apparently fine with Lena, had demonstrated a consistent preference for things being what they were rather than what they were called. They had seen each other twice, since Bellmere House Patty's, the hardware store, and talked on the phone 4 times, and texted in the intermittent way that people texted when they had actual lives and were not manufacturing reasons to be in contact. It was not a lot, by some measures. It felt like exactly the right amount, by the measure of 2 people who had each been hurt by moving too fast and had learned, separately and expensively, what that cost. November came in cold and sudden, the way it sometimes did in this part of the country, skipping the gentle middle ground of late October and arriving fully formed with gray skies and dead leaves pasted flat against the wet sidewalks. Hotel heating system, which Wesley had flagged as needing a full inspection in September, began doing the thing it always did when the temperature dropped, cycling unevenly, overheating some wings and leaving others cold, generating a steady stream of complaints from guests and a corresponding steady stream of work orders for Wesley, who had predicted this exact situation and documented it and been told the inspection budget would be reviewed in Q1. Q1 was February. The heating system did not care about Q1. He was on his 3rd consecutive 12-hour day when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't immediately recognize. "This is Sandra Okafor, Director of Facilities, Marlowe Digital. Asked me to reach out. We have a facilities management role opening at our downtown office. Senior level. Significant salary increase over standard market rate. Thought you might be interested. I can send details." Wesley read the text twice. Then he put his phone back in his chest pocket and spent the next 20 minutes replacing a thermostat coupling on the 8th floor with the focused attention of a man who was choosing not to think about something until he was in a better position to think about it. Called Lena that evening, after Mila was asleep. "You had someone from your company contact me about a job," he said. Pause. A beat too long. Sandra mentioned she'd reached out. "Through you. I may have." Another pause. "I mentioned your name in a conversation about the role." Sandra made her own decision to reach out. "Lena, the role is legitimate," she said, and her voice had shifted into the register he now recognized as the one she used when she was defending a position she was not entirely sure deserved defending. "It's a real opening. The salary is—" "I know it's a real opening," he said. "That's not the problem. Then what is?" He sat down at the kitchen table. The water cycle project was long gone. Mila had gotten an A on it, and it was now rolled up somewhere in her closet, but there was a drawing of a horse she'd made last week that was still taped to the refrigerator. And he looked at it while he tried to organize what he wanted to say into something fair, rather than just reactive. "I told you when we talked at Patty's that I didn't want to wonder whether you were trying to fix me," he said. "I wasn't being dramatic about it. I meant it. I wasn't trying to fix you. You had your HR director call me about a job that pays significantly more than what I make, after a month of seeing each other. Director of Facilities," she said. "And I didn't tell Sandra to—" "You mentioned my name." The line was quiet. "Yeah," she said finally. "I did." He let that sit for a moment. "Why?" Another pause, and this one had a different quality, not defensive, but honest in the way that honesty sometimes arrived only after the defense ran out of ground. "'Cause I like you," she said, "and I thought it would help. I didn't think it through past that." Wesley looked at the horse on the refrigerator. "You meant well," he said. "I'm not questioning that. But I need you to hear me when I tell you something. No, I'm not a project. I'm not a situation that needs improving. The work I do is real work and it matters. and I'm good at it, and I don't need to be moved up or moved over or installed somewhere more appropriate because someone thinks I should be." His voice was still level. It was not easy to keep it level, but he did. "If we keep doing this, whatever this is, it has to be with the understanding that you're not my ladder and I'm not your cause." Silence. "That was a hard thing to say," she said quietly. "And you said it anyway, yes." "Okay." He heard her exhale. "I hear you, and I'm sorry, I overstepped. I know. I won't do it again." He believed her. That was the thing about Lena when she said something with that particular directness, stripped of the corporate composure and the defensive layer she kept over most things, it landed as true. She was not easy to trust quickly, and he wasn't trying to trust her quickly, but he trusted that sentence. "Tell Sandra thank you," he said. "The role isn't the right fit. I will. And next time you want to do something for me," he said, "just ask me what I need." "A beat. What do you need?" she said. And the question was different now, quieter, more real. He thought about it. "Mila has a school thing next Thursday, a winter showcase. Her class is doing a thing with bells. She's been practicing for 3 weeks. He paused. "She's been practicing a lot. I thought about what you said at the diner. About your mom coming to watch things. I thought—" He stopped. "Fine if it's too much. What time does it start?" Lena said. 7 o'clock. "I'll be there at 6:45, she said. Wesley looked at the horse on the refrigerator. "Okay," he said. He did not tell Mila who was coming. Told her a friend was going to watch the showcase. And Mila, who was 8 and had her father's instinct for not asking questions she didn't actually want answered yet, said okay and went back to practicing the bell sequence in her room, which involved an actual handheld bell that she struck with the focus of a surgeon, and which Wesley had heard approximately 900 times in the past 3 weeks, and which he no longer heard as music so much as a particular frequency of love. Lena arrived at 6:42, which was technically earlier than she'd promised. She was wearing a dark coat over regular clothes, and she had the careful, slightly uncertain look of someone who understood they were entering someone else's territory and was trying to do so with appropriate respect. Wesley met her at the entrance of the school gymnasium, which smelled like floor wax, and that specific gymnasium smell that was the same in every gymnasium in every school in the country, regardless of anything else. "You came," he said. "I said I would." "I know." He stopped. "Thank you." She looked at him. "You don't have to thank me for showing up." That, too. They found seats in the second row, which was not the front row. Mila had specifically said not the front row, because apparently the front row was for nervous parents, and she was not going to be nervous, and she didn't want him making it weird. Wesley had interpreted this as second row, which seemed to satisfy the spirit of the instruction. The gymnasium filled up around them. Other parents, grandparents, older siblings holding younger siblings, someone's very elderly relative in a folding chair that the school had placed specially near the aisle. The noise of it was the specific comforting noise of people gathered around children being proud, which was not a complicated noise, but was a consistently good one. Lena sat beside him with her coat folded on her lap and watched the gymnasium fill. "I haven't been to a school event in a while," she said. "Owen's school doesn't do these? He goes to a different school. They do a winter gala. She stopped. "It's a lot of performances and catered food and parents' schools." A pause. "This is nicer." Wesley didn't say anything to that. He knew what she meant, and he didn't need to confirm it. The showcase started 7 minutes late, which was about right for an elementary school event. Mila's class came out in 2 rows wearing white shirts and expressions that ranged from genuinely excited to mildly terrified. And Mila was in the second position of the front row, with her handheld bell and the focused look of a person who had practiced it 900 times and was prepared for approximately 1 more. She found Wesley's face in the second row almost immediately. Then she saw the woman sitting beside him, and her expression did something complicated, not bad complicated, just the processing kind of complicated that happened when something was new and you weren't sure yet what category it went in. She looked at Lena for 2 seconds, back at Wesley, yes, then forward at the conductor, which was Mrs. Cartwright, with a baton that she used with enormous enthusiasm. The bells were, genuinely, quite good. Wesley had heard the sequence so many times that he'd thought it would mean nothing when performed, sitting in the gymnasium with the other parents and the floor wax smell and the floor wax and the white shirts and the children doing their absolute best with something they'd practiced until they were tired of practicing it, something. It meant the thing it was supposed to mean, which was that a group of 8-year-olds had worked at a thing and done it. He did not look at Lena during the performance. He watched Mila, but he was aware in his peripheral vision that Lena was not looking at her phone or at the program or at anything else. She was watching the children play their bells with the full attention of someone chosen to be exactly where she was. After the showcase, while parents were gathering their children and the gymnasium was converting from performance space to organized chaos, came over with her bell still in her hand and her white shirt slightly untucked, which was how it always ended up. "Dad," she said. "You're in the second row, your instructions," he said. She accepted this. Then she looked at Lena with the measuring look of an 8-year-old who had decided to form her own opinion. "I'm Mila," she said. "I know," Lena said. "I'm Lena. I've heard a lot about you." Mila considered this. "What did he say? That you got an A on your water cycle project? That you know a lot about pyroclastic flow? That you correct his pronunciation?" Mila looked at Wesley with an expression that was very close to approval. "She knows about the water cycle project," she told him, as though he might not have been aware. "I'm aware," he said. "Can she come for pancakes?" Mila asked, with the directness of a person who had not yet learned that some questions required more setup. Wesley looked at Lena. Lena looked at Mila. "I like pancakes," she said. Mila's expression settled into something that was not quite a smile but was in the neighborhood. "We get them at the place with the syrup that's in the little bottles," she said. "The big ones. The little ones. That's the best kind," Lena said. The place with the little syrup bottles was a diner 3 blocks from Wesley's apartment that he and Mila had been going to since Mila was 4. No, and the woman who worked Saturday mornings knew their order before they finished sitting down. Her name was Greta, and she was somewhere in her 60s, and wore the same style of comfortable shoes every day, and had the no-nonsense warmth of someone who had made thousands of people feel welcome without ever making a production of it. When the 3 of them came in, Greta looked at the table count and added a menu without comment, which was its own form of grace. Ordered chocolate chip pancakes, some chip pegs, which was what she always ordered. Wesley ordered the regular stack with eggs. Lena looked at the menu with genuine deliberation and then ordered the blueberry pancakes because, she told Mila, she had recently learned that blueberry was underrated. Mila agreed with great conviction. They sat in the corner booth, Mila on one side, Wesley and Lena on the other, and the conversation moved the way conversations moved when a child was at the table, which was in whatever direction the child decided it should move. Lena about Owen. Lena described the dinosaur obsession in enough detail that Mila determined Owen sounded like a reasonable person and asked if he knew about volcanoes, because there was actually a connection between volcanic ash and certain extinction events, which Mila had opinions about. He would probably love that, Lena said. He'd talk about it for a long time. That's okay, Mila said. I talk about things for a long time, too. I've noticed, Wesley said. Mila pointed her fork at him, which she had been told not to do and did anyway. You also talk about things for a long time. You just do it quietly so people don't notice. Pressed her lips together in the way that people did when they were trying not to laugh at someone else's expense. And Wesley looked at his eggs and decided not to respond, which Mila took as a full concession. Pancakes were good. They were the kind of pancakes that didn't need to be anything other than what they were, which was a category of food. Wesley had always appreciated. The syrup came in the small bottles, as promised. Used approximately twice as much syrup as any reasonable person would, which was something Wesley had long ago stopped commenting on because the math on what he spent on syrup versus the cost of the argument was clear. At some point during the meal, while Mila was explaining to Lena the specific differences between a triceratops and a protoceratops, with the focused energy of someone who had recently acquired this information and needed to transfer it somewhere, Wesley sat back slightly and just let the booth be what it was. The diner noise around them, Greta refilling his coffee without being asked, Mila's voice going into the particular register it went into when she was teaching something to a person she'd decided was worth teaching. He thought about the text from Sandra Okafor about the conversation it had led to, about saying the hard thing and having it land as it should. Thought about Lena sitting in the second row of a gymnasium for an hour on a Thursday night to watch children play bells, and how she'd done it without making it seem like a concession or a demonstration or anything other than a simple choice. He thought about Travis Barlow, which he did less often now, but still occasionally, not with anger, which had never fully arrived, with the particular reflection that came from knowing someone had tried to define you and hadn't managed it. And he thought about what Travis had said in the hotel corridor that morning, weeks ago now. Tomorrow she'll still be a CEO and you'll still be fixing elevators. He had answered that he slept fine. He did sleep fine. Better, lately, than he had in a while, which he had not fully examined and did not intend to examine too closely for fear of understanding why in a way that would make him more careful about it. It was the second week of December, 11 weeks after Billionaire House, when the thing with Marcus Hale happened. Marcus Hale was a name that meant nothing to Wesley and a great deal to Lena's professional world. He was a managing partner at a firm that did significant business with Marlowe Digital, kind of man who occupied a large amount of professional space through a combination of actual capability and a cultivated presence that made him seem larger than the details of any particular room. He was also, Lena had mentioned once without elaboration, someone she had known for several years, and who had, during the period following her divorce, made it clear that his interest in her was not exclusively professional. She had handled it the way she handled most things she didn't want in her life, cleanly and without extensive explanation. Wesley met him by accident. It was a Saturday afternoon 3 weeks before the holidays, and Lena had brought Owen to the city's winter market, the kind of outdoor event, with booths selling things that were mostly overpriced, but came wrapped in brown paper and string, which made them feel special. Owen had wanted to come because there was apparently a booth selling fossilized shark teeth, which qualified as paleontology adjacent and was therefore non-negotiable. Wesley brought Mila for the same market by coincidence, because Mila had seen a sign for it on the way to school and had spent 4 days making the case for it with the persistence of a small attorney. They had not planned to meet. They texted each other from opposite ends of the market around 2 in the afternoon and discovered they were approximately 40 feet apart, which led to a convergence at the booth selling roasted chestnuts, where Owen and Mila regarded each other with the cautious assessment of children who had heard a lot about each other and were now doing the work of determining whether the reports matched reality. Owen was small for 6, with Lena's dark coloring and a serious expression that occasionally broke into a wide, total smile that looked nothing like his regular face. He was wearing a winter jacket with a dinosaur on it, which Mila immediately identified and named correctly, which caused Owen's serious expression to give way to the total smile for about 4 seconds before reconstituting itself. "Dinosaurs," he said to his mother, in a tone suggesting this was unexpected data. Mila allowed, "But I know more about volcanoes." "Volcanoes are related to the KPG extinction," Owen said. Mila said, "That's why I know about them." They had known each other for approximately 90 seconds. Wesley watched them move toward the fossil booth together, already in conversation, and felt something he was not going to try to name, precisely because naming it felt premature, and he was a man who had learned to hold good things carefully. Marcus Hale arrived 20 minutes later. He came from the direction of the coffee stand, well-dressed in the way that weekend casual was still calculated to make a point, and he saw Lena before she saw him and had already arranged his expression into a warm, slightly too familiar smile by the time she turned. He said her name with the ease of someone who had said it many times. "I didn't know you'd be here." Marcus, her voice was even. Small city, apparently. His eyes moved to Wesley, doing the quick assessment that certain kinds of men did, the registration of unfamiliarity. Then the clothing, the absence of the signals that would identify Wesley as someone in Marcus's professional world, which was a calculation that happened in about 2 seconds, and reached a conclusion that was visible in the slight adjustment of his posture. Lena made no move to explain Wesley or introduce him on Marcus's terms. She turned to Wesley with the deliberate calm of someone choosing the order of things. Wesley, this is Marcus Hale. We work together occasionally. Marcus, this is Wesley. Marcus extended his hand. His handshake was the kind that was designed to communicate something, with slightly more grip than necessary. Wesley matched it, not because he wanted to play that game, but because releasing early also communicated something, and he didn't feel like communicating it. Wesley, Marcus said. What do you do? Building maintenance, Wesley said. Marcus nodded in the way people nodded when they were being careful not to react to information as passion. He said in the tone that people used when they had decided to be magnanimous. Somebody's got to keep things running. Yeah, Wesley said. Marcus turned back to Lena. The attention was deliberate, the kind that was designed to make the person being excluded aware of the exclusion. I heard the fourth quarter numbers came in strong. Congratulations. We should have dinner sometime. Catch up properly. We're always catching up at meetings, Lena said. Think we're current. Marcus smiled. It was a practiced smile. You always did take some convincing. He looked at Wesley briefly. Nice to meet you. He walked away without waiting for a response. The winter market continued around them. The chestnut vendor made change for someone. Child somewhere nearby had found a balloon. Lena watched Marcus leave with the expression of someone who had managed that interaction correctly and was now quietly recalculating the cost. Wesley stood beside her and said nothing for a moment. That happens a lot, he asked. More than it should. He looked at me like I was something to account for. You are something to account for, she said. That's the problem. For him, I mean. She turned to look at Wesley directly. For me, I know. He watched Owen and Mila at the fossil booth. Owen was holding a fossilized shark tooth and explaining something to Mila, who was listening with her head tilted. Does it bother you? The version of that, what people like him think. She was quiet for a moment. A real moment, not a managed pause. 12 years ago, yes, she said, because it would have affected things. The business was new. The relationships mattered. One conversation could close a door. She looked at the booth where their children were comparing teeth, not the way it used to. The company is established. My reputation doesn't depend on who Marcus Hale thinks I should be seen with. She paused. I'm tired of making myself smaller to fit inside other people's ideas of what I'm supposed to want. Wesley put his hands in his pockets. The winter air was cold and clean. What do you want? He said. She looked at him. Not the way she looked when she was being careful or composed or assessing. Just directly, the way she'd looked at him at Patty's when she said she'd been ready to let it go before he called. I want to find out what this is, she said. Somebody else's $200 bet on it, without Marcus Hale deciding what it should look like. She stopped. Without you having an opinion about where I work, he said quietly. She winced slightly, which she hadn't done when he'd brought it up on the phone. Yes, she said. That too. I already have an opinion about where I work, he said. Fine, I'm good at it. I know you are. And what I earn is what I earn. And what it covers is what it covers, and I'm not ashamed of any of it. That too, she said. I knew it at Billionaire House. I knew it when you told me about the parking lot. She looked at him. I think I just needed to hear you say it out loud. One more time to remind myself not to do something stupid again. Wesley almost smiled. One more time, he said. After that, I start charging. She did smile, the real one. You can put it on my account. Owen came back with a fossilized shark tooth in one hand and a serious expression that had made room for a small amount of visible excitement. Was 2 steps behind him, carrying a small piece of amber she had negotiated for, with a patience and strategic patience that Wesley suspected she'd inherited from him and would one day be devastating in a professional context. Come for pancakes sometime? Mila asked. Both of them just Owen, because 8-year-olds were specific, and she had already determined that the pancake diner was a controlled environment, and she wanted to oversee the introduction properly. Looked at his mother. Lena looked at Wesley. Wesley looked at Mila. That's your call, he said. Mila considered Owen, with the seriousness the decision deserved. Owen waited with the composure of a child who had been in enough new situations to know that waiting was usually the right move. Yes, Mila said, he can come. Owen nodded once, as though this had been the expected outcome, and he was satisfied with how the negotiation had resolved. They walked the rest of the winter market together. The 4 of them, the way that 4 people walked together when Two of them were children, with opinions in which both warranted attention, and two of them were adults who had decided, without saying so out loud, that this afternoon was something they both wanted to be present for. Marcus Hale bought his coffee somewhere behind them and moved on to wherever he was going. The fossilized shark tooth lived on Owen's bookshelf for years afterward. The piece of amber ended up next to the purple horse drawing on Mila's dresser, and she told everyone who asked that she had bought it herself, which was true, because she had negotiated for it, and she saw absolutely no reason to undervalue that. The winter market closed at 5. They walked to the parking structure together, Owen and Mila having shifted from cautious assessment to an argument about which period of geological history was more interesting, which was a specific kind of argument that could only be resolved by more information and would therefore continue indefinitely, which suited both of them. Parking structure entrance, they stopped. Thursday, Lena said. Pancakes, if that still works. Thursday works, Wesley said. Owen and Mila had moved on from geology to something else, their voices overlapping in the way that children's voices overlapped. When the conversation had moved faster than the participants, Wesley watched them for a moment. Then he looked at Lena. Marcus Hale looked at me like I was a footnote, he said, bitterly just observationally. He was wrong about that, she said. Pause. I just wanted to say it out loud one more time. Pienta Queenserbaint. She looked at him with the expression that was becoming familiar, the one that arrived when something landed exactly where she hadn't expected it to, and she was deciding how to hold it. Put it on my account, she said. He nodded once. They went to their separate cars, and their separate apartments, and their separate evenings, Owen to his dinosaurs books, Mila to her bell practice, which had resumed for a second school concert no one had asked for, but which she had decided was happening anyway. Isel isi zamind. Wesley made dinner for the two of them and listened to the bell from the other room and thought about the winter market and the parking structure and Marcus Hale's handshake. He thought about what Lena had said, I'm tired of making myself smaller to fit inside other people's ideas of what I'm supposed to want. He had not said anything in response to that sentence in the moment. He had just let her say it and have it be said, but he'd heard it. He heard it the way you heard, things that told you something true about a person, not the performed version of them. The version that showed up to meetings and managed perceptions and kept a careful distance between what they felt and what they showed. The actual version. The one that got tired sometimes and said so. He turned the heat down on the pasta, called Mila for dinner, and went on with the evening. It was a good evening. An ordinary one. The kind that didn't ask anything of him except to be in it. He was getting better at that. Thursday pancakes happened, and then happened again, the following Thursday, and then became a thing that happened most Thursdays without anyone formally declaring it a thing, which was how the best things usually became things, not by announcement but by repetition, by the quiet accumulation of ordinary mornings that added up to something that felt, eventually, like a habit worth keeping. Owen had opinions about pancakes that he expressed with the specificity of someone who had thought about the matter at length. He preferred plain buttermilk with the syrup on the side, not poured over, because he liked to control the distribution, found this approach overly cautious and said so. Owen defended his methodology with the calm logic of a 6-year-old who had decided he was right, which was impervious to argument, which Mila eventually accepted because she was pragmatic enough to recognize an immovable position. They reached a mutual understanding that did not require either of them to change their syrup philosophy, which was roughly the same diplomatic outcome most adults spent years trying to achieve and rarely managed as efficiently. Greta, the Saturday morning waitress at the diner, had learned their orders within 2 visits and stopped bringing menus after the 3rd. She called Owen the quiet one and Mila the talker. With affection, yes, he entreated the 4 of them, with the comfortable familiarity she extended to regulars, which was its own form of welcome that cost nothing and meant a great deal. Wesley noticed that Lena relaxed in the diner in a way she didn't relax in other places. She took her coat off immediately. She didn't check her phone, unless Mila asked her something about it. She drank the mediocre coffee without commentary, and sometimes ordered a second cup, which by the 3rd Thursday had become a running joke between her and Wesley that required no explanation, because the joke was coffee was not good, and they kept drinking it anyway. Funny for reasons that had less to do with the coffee than with everything else. December moved toward the holidays with the particular momentum of a month that always ran faster than you expected. The hotel heating system was eventually stabilized after Wesley submitted a formal report that outlined exactly what would happen if the system wasn't properly serviced, documented it with timestamps, and handed it to his supervisor in a format that made it difficult to file away quietly. The inspection happened in mid-December, which was not Q1 and not exactly a victory, but was close enough to feel like one. Wesley didn't say anything about it to Travis, who was still doing the complicated thing of being both chastened and not quite able to acknowledge it, which Wesley found easier to manage than outright hostility would have been. The holidays complicated the schedule, the way holidays always did. Went to her grandmother's for a long weekend, which left Wesley with an apartment that was too quiet in the specific way that apartments became too quiet when the person who made them not quiet was somewhere else. He reorganized his toolbox, which did not need reorganizing, and fixed the dripping kitchen faucets, a thief one that he had been meaning to fix for 3 months and had kept putting off for no reason he could precisely identify. He ate dinner at his kitchen table alone and watched something on television that he could not have described afterward, and went to bed at 10:30, which was earlier than he usually went to bed when Mila was home, because when she was home there was always one more thing. Texted Lena at 9 o'clock that he was going to bed early because the apartment was quiet. She texted back, "Owen is with his father until Sunday. I'm reorganizing my closet. This is what adults do alone, apparently." He wrote back, "Fixed a faucet." She wrote, "Very on brand." He smiled at his phone in the empty apartment and felt briefly the comfortable absurdity of two adults texting each other about faucets and closets on a Friday night because their children were elsewhere. That was somehow a better Friday night than a lot of the Friday nights that had preceded it. It was the second week of January when Lena's car broke down. Dramatically, it didn't break down at a bad time or in an inconvenient place, exactly. Except that most times and places were inconvenient for a car to break down when you had a 6-year-old and a company and a schedule that did not have much tolerance for variables. It broke down in the parking garage of her office building on a Tuesday evening at 6:15, which she discovered when she turned the key and got the particular clicking sound that Wesley, when she described it on the phone, identified within approximately 4 seconds. "Dead battery," he said. "Or the alternator. Probably the battery. I have a meeting tomorrow at 7:30 in the morning." Quiet for a moment. She could hear something in the background and what she now recognized as the particular ambience of it when Mila was doing homework, which was a combination of pencil sounds and occasional sighing. "I'll come look at it. You don't have to."
Lena.
"Can call a service." "You can," he said. "Or I can come look at it in about 40 minutes and we'll know in 10 minutes whether it's fixable tonight or needs a tow. Either way, you'll have more information faster." A pause. Liz almost done with homework. "She can come if that's okay." She thought about what he'd said at Patty's, "Just ask me what I need," and how she'd said the same back to him and meant it, and how this was not a demonstration or a favor with strings, but just a man who knew about cars, offering to look at a car. "Okay," she said, "thank you. Stop thanking me for things. You keep doing things worth thanking you for." "That's a you problem," he said, and she could hear in his voice that he almost smiled when he said it. He arrived 43 minutes later with Mila, who was carrying her homework in a folder because she had not quite finished the last section and had apparently negotiated with Wesley to finish it in the car, who entered parking us with the interested expression of someone who had never been in an office building parking garage and found the concrete and fluorescent lighting mildly fascinating. Wesley looked at the car for about 3 minutes, hood up, flashlight, the particular focused quiet he got when he was assessing something, and then stood up and wiped his hands on the rag he carried in his back pocket. "Battery's dead," he said. "Probably been failing for a while. You notice it starting slower than usual lately?" "Maybe," she said. "I don't pay a lot of attention to the car." "I know." He said it without judgment. "Can jump it, but it'll fail again. You need a new battery." He looked around the garage. "There's an auto parts store on Renner. Still open for another hour if we go now." "Wesley, it's 7 o'clock. I know what time it is. You have Mala who is sitting on that concrete barrier doing her homework and is fine, he said, tilting his head toward where Mila was, indeed sitting on a low concrete barrier, with her folder open across her knees, pencil moving, looking entirely at home in a parking garage. $30 for a battery. 20 minutes to install it. You drive home. You get to your meeting at 7:30. Everybody's fine. Looked at Mila, then at Wesley, then at the car. I could pay someone $150 to do this tomorrow, she said. You could, he said. Or you could pay $30 tonight and not think about it. I don't want you to feel like I'm using you as a minus. His voice was quiet but definite. Let me help you. Because you need it. Because I'm here, and I can, and it's not a thing. She stood there for a moment in the parking garage with its fluorescent hum and the smell of concrete and old exhaust. She had spent 12 years becoming the kind of woman who solved problems alone, by necessity and preference, and it was strange, not uncomfortable. Just strange to be seen in a parking garage at 7 o'clock in January with a man who was simply offering to fix the problem and wanting nothing from the transaction except to fix the problem. Okay, she said. Good. He closed the hood. Mila, we're going to Renner Street. Looked up from her folder. Is the car broken? Battery. Can I watch you install it? If you finish that last section. Looked at the folder. I'm almost done. Almost done isn't done. Mila finished it in the car, on the way to the auto parts store. In the back seat next to Owen's empty car seat. Lena had driven Owen to his father's that morning and hadn't moved the seat with the flashlight from Wesley's bag because the overhead light in the truck was unreliable, which she managed with the resourcefulness of a child accustomed to improvising. The battery cost $28. Wesley installed it in the parking garage with Mila watching and asking questions that he answered while he worked, because he had long since accepted that doing things with Mila present meant doing things and explaining them simultaneously, which had actually made him better at articulating what he was doing and why, which was a professional benefit he had not anticipated from fatherhood, but was grateful for. Why does the positive go first? Mila asked. To avoid a short circuit. What's a short circuit? When electricity goes somewhere it's not supposed to. Like when you accidentally touch the wrong wires. Exactly like that. Has that happened to you? Twice. Looked at Lena. He's probably leaving some out. I'm not leaving any out, Wesley said. You leave things out when they make you sound like you made a mistake. Lena pressed her lips together. Wesley finished the battery connection without responding, which Mila noted and filed. Car started on the first turn of the key. Lena sat in the driver's seat with the engine running and the parking garage quiet around her, and something moved across her face that she didn't try to manage or compose. It was a small moment, a battery in a parking garage, a Tuesday night in January, and it was also small at all, in the way that small moments sometimes were not small when you were paying attention to what they actually contained. She got out of the car. Wesley was putting his tools back in his bag. Yes, he'd intervened. Mila was drawing something on the back of her finished homework folder, with the pencil she'd been using, apparently having decided the evening contained artistic potential. Thank you, Lena said. See, I told you to stop. I know what you told me. She looked at him steadily. I'm going to say it anyway because I want to. He looked up from the bag. He read her expression and nodded once, accepting it. You're welcome, he said. Question of what they were to each other named properly, with the specific vocabulary of adults in a relationship, arrived not as a conversation they planned, but as something Mila introduced by accident on a Thursday morning in February. They were at the diner. The four of them, the usual configuration. Owen had finished his buttermilk pancakes with controlled syrup distribution and was drawing a stegosaurus on a napkin with a pen Greta had produced for him from her apron pocket when Mila looked up from her chocolate chip chits and said, without particular preamble, "Is Lena your girlfriend?" The booth went briefly quiet. Wesley looked at Lena. Lena looked at Wesley. Owens looked up from the stegosaurus with the attentiveness of someone who recognized that the conversation had shifted registers. Where did that come from? Wesley said. Mila shrugged with the practiced nonchalance of a child who had thought about this for a while and was pretending she hadn't. Sadie at school asked who was at my Bell concert, and I said a friend of my dad's, and she said, was it a girlfriend? She said, and I said I didn't know. She looked at both of them. Probably no. Sadie's very well informed, Wesley said. She has 4 older siblings. Said, as though this explained everything, which in Wesley's experience it did. He looked at Lena again. Lena had the expression of someone who was not going to solve this particular problem on his behalf, which was fair. That's a conversation for when it's just us, he said to Mila. A diner booth thing. Mila considered this. But you're not saying no. I'm saying it's a conversation for later. That means, probably yes, Milsma said, and went back to her pancakes with the satisfied expression of someone who had obtained the information they came for. Owen continued the Stegosaurus without comment. He had a younger child's talent for processing information that didn't directly concern him by simply not processing it, which Lena had long recognized as one of his more useful qualities. Conversation for when it was just us happened. 4 days later, on a Sunday evening, after Mila had been in bed for an hour, and Wesley was fairly confident she was actually asleep rather than conducting reconnaissance from behind a closed door. Lena had come over for dinner, nothing formal, just pasta and salad and the comfortable mess of 2 adults cooking in a small kitchen where the counter space was limited and the arrangement required occasional physical negotiation. And after dinner, they sat at his kitchen table with tea that Lena had made because she'd found his tea at the back of a cabinet and decided this was what the evening called for. Mila's question, Lena said. Yeah, he turned his mug. I've been thinking about it. What have you been thinking? He looked at her across the table. Kitchen was quiet. The apartment had the particular warmth of an evening that had been good without requiring anything extraordinary, and the horse drawing was still on the refrigerator because neither of them had taken it down. I've been thinking that what we are doesn't need a word for my benefit, he said. Mila's 8, and she asked a direct question, and she deserves a direct answer. And to give her a direct answer, I need to know what the answer is. He paused. What's the answer? Lena looked at him. Do you want a word for it? I want to know what it is. The word can be whatever. Quiet for a moment, not a hesitating quiet, but a considering one, the kind that she did when she was being honest, rather than quick. I've been in this apartment more in the last few months than anywhere else that isn't my own home or my office, she said. I've eaten pancakes every Thursday. I've watched your daughter perform with a bell. You installed a battery in my car in a parking garage in January. She looked down at the mug briefly, then back up. I told a client last week that I had plans on Thursday morning, and I didn't explain what plans. I haven't had plans I didn't explain in years. A pause. Think what this is that you're the person I want to tell about my day, even when the day is unremarkable. Especially then, actually. Wesley looked at her for a moment. So yes, he said. Yes, she agreed. Mila's going to tell Sadie immediately. Owen's going to tell his father, Lena said, which will be a different kind of conversation. Wesley hadn't thought about Daniel Marlowe, which was, he recognized a gap in his thinking. Lena's ex-husband was not a character who had appeared in any of his mental models of what this all looked like, which was the kind of oversight that was easy to make when you were the person who didn't have an ex-spouse in the picture. Daniel Marlowe had Owen every other weekend and 2 evenings a week, and had, by Lena's account, moved from confused resentment post-divorce to a functional co-parenting arrangement that required both of them to be civil in the specific way that civil was different from warm. He was remarried, had a daughter from the new marriage, and had opinions about Lena's life that he expressed to Owen in ways that were technically never inappropriate, and were nonetheless consistently subtle in the ways that mattered. Is he going to be a problem? Wesley asked. Lena thought about it. He's going to have something to say about it. Say. What's he going to say? Probably something about stability, about Owen's environment. She turned her mug, which is legitimate, actually. I'm not dismissing it. He has a right to care about who's in Owen's life. So do I, for that matter, Wesley said, about Mila's. She looked at him. I know. And for what it's worth, Owen came home from the first pancake morning and told his father that he'd met a girl named Mila who knew about the KPG extinction event and that she was, and I'm quoting, acceptable. She paused. From Owen, acceptable is high praise. From Mila, he can come was also high praise. Almost smiled. Then they've already vetted each other, and we're behind. We're parents, he said. Being behind is the default state. She laughed. Yes, the real one, and the kitchen was warm, And outside the window, the February night was cold, and the street was quiet, and somewhere in the apartment, Phila was asleep with her bell on the bedside table, and the piece of amber from the winter market on her dresser. It was late March when Daniel Marlowe called Lena on a Tuesday evening and said what Wesley had expected in some form was coming. Lena told Slee about it 2 days later. At the diner, after the children had finished their pancakes and gone to investigate something at the counter that Greta had indicated was worth investigating, which turned out to be a jar of old-fashioned candy that she kept for this exact purpose. He said he wants to meet you, Lena said. Wesley wrapped his hands around his mug. That's reasonable. He said he wants to understand who Owen is spending time with. Also reasonable, he said. She stopped, looked at her coffee. He asked what you waited. I told him, she said. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said he just wanted to make sure Owen was in a stable environment. She looked up. He didn't say it as an insult, but it was in there. The implication. Yes. Wesley thought about that. About the particular mathematics of being assessed by people who had never met you through the lens of what you did for work, and how that mathematics never quite came out in your favor if the person doing the calculating had already decided what the variables meant. I'll meet him, he said. You don't have to, Lena. He looked at her steadily. He's Owen's father. If Owen is going to be around me, Daniel Marlowe gets to look me in the eye. That's fair. He paused. I'd want the same. She looked at him with the expression she got. Sometimes the one he'd first seen at Billionaire House when he said wasn't anyone's last option, where something shifted briefly behind her composure, and she let it shift without catching it. You keep doing that, she said. Doing what? Saying the thing I didn't know I needed to hear someone say. He looked at his mug. I'm just saying the true thing. She said. That's what I mean. The meeting with Daniel happened on a Saturday in April at a neutral location that Lena suggested, and Daniel approved a coffee place downtown that was neither of their territories, which was the right call. Wesley wore what he always wore: clean jeans, a good jacket, and arrived 5 minutes early, which he did everywhere. Daniel Marlowe was tall, well-dressed in a way that announced itself carefully, and had the kind of face that was objectively good-looking, in a way that had probably opened some doors and led him to believe it had opened more than it actually had. He shook Wesley's hand with the measured grip of someone who had been told a firm handshake was important and had never moved past that piece of advice to the next level of understanding what handshakes were actually for. Wesley, he said. Daniel Wesley said. They ordered coffee and sat down and did the thing where two men who did not know each other and had no particular reason to like each other, and a very specific reason to be seated across from each other, talked about neutral things for the first 4 minutes before one of them decided to say the real thing. Daniel was the one who said it. Owen talks about you, he said. About you and about Mila. He wrapped his hand around his cup. He seems good. I want to make sure it stays that way. That's what I want too, Wesley said. Lena says you work at a hotel. Maintenance, yeah. Daniel nodded. Long hours? Sometimes. I have Mila, so I manage it. Right. Another nod. I just look. He set down the cup. I'm going to be direct because I think it's more efficient. Owen's been through an adjustment period. The divorce was hard on him even though we tried to manage it. He's stable now. I'm protective of that stability. You should be, Wesley said. He's your son. Daniel looked at him, slightly recalibrated by that response. I'm not judging what you do. Okay, I just want to know that the people around Owen are, he paused, selecting words. Grounded. Consistent. I get up at 5:30 every morning, Wesley said. At work by 6:45. I do what I say I'm going to do. My daughter is 8 and healthy and doing well in school, and she's never once gone to bed without knowing where I was. He looked at Daniel. What grounded looks like to you. That's what it looks like to me. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Lena's, he stopped. Started again. She's not easy to be with. Not because she's a bad person. She's a good person. She's just a lot. She's always running at 100%, and it doesn't always leave room. She makes room, Wesley said. When it matters, Daniel looked at him with an assessing look of someone who was receiving information that conflicted with a settled narrative and wasn't sure what to do with the conflict. She talks about you, Daniel said. Not unkindly, almost with something that might eventually become something like respect. She talked about Owen the first night I met her, Wesley said, for about 20 minutes. That told me what I needed to know. Daniel picked up his coffee and drank it, and they sat in the neutral coffee place on a Saturday in April, and the conversation moved into somewhat easier territory: Owen's school year, Mila's bell concert, winter market, things that were common ground, because children created common ground even between adults who shared none. They didn't become friends that morning. That wasn't the point, and they both understood it. When they shook hands outside the coffee place, Daniel's grip was different, not the announced handshake of the beginning, but just a handshake, functional and direct, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. Take care of her, Daniel said. Not as a demand, more as a thing you said to someone when you had decided they were the person who was going to be doing that. She takes care of herself, Wesley said. I'm just around. Daniel looked at him for a moment, and then nodded once and walked to his car. Wesley walked to his truck. He sat in the cab for a moment with his hands on the wheel and looked at the coffee place and thought about the fact that he had just met his girlfriend's ex-husband in a downtown coffee place on a Saturday morning, which was the kind of thing his 25-year-old self could not have predicted as a specific type of morning he would someday have, and which his 32-year-old self had navigated. He thought reasonably well. Texted Lena, coffee with Daniel. Fine, he loves Owen. That's obvious. She texted back in about 4 minutes. How'd it go, really? He thought about it. He said, take care of you. I said, you take care of yourself. He thought about it and agreed. A longer pause this time. That's the most accurate thing anyone's said about me in years, she wrote. He wrote back, you ready for pancakes? It was Saturday. The diner was open. Was at her grandmother's until 3, and Owen was with Daniel until tomorrow, which meant it was just the two of them in a booth with the laminated menus and the mediocre coffee and the apple pie that was made from actual apples. They stayed for 2 hours. Greta refilled the coffee without being asked, the way she always did, and didn't make anything of it, the way she never did, and the Saturday moved around them at its own pace, unhurried and ordinary, the way the best mornings were not arranged or performed or designed to demonstrate anything to anyone. Just two people in a diner, deciding quietly and without announcement, this was the life they wanted to keep showing up to. Spring came the way it always did in that city, not all at once but in installments. A warm day followed by 2 cold ones. 3 warm days in a row. A late frost that killed half the flowers people had planted too early because they'd been optimistic, which was the risk of optimism. By May, the trees were fully out, and the city had made its seasonal conversion from the gray patience of winter to something that moved faster and smelled better, and made people walk outside for reasons that had nothing to do with necessity. Wesley had been promoted. Not the way Travis had imagined it. Back in the early days when he'd used Wesley's circumstances as material for cruelty, not moved sideways into something cleaner or better compensated by someone else's connections. He'd been promoted because the hotel's chief engineer, a man named Randall Briggs, who had worked the building for 22 years, and who assessed competence with the dispassionate accuracy of someone who had seen enough incompetence to know the difference, had submitted Wesley's name for senior maintenance technician with a written recommendation that was 3 paragraphs long, and contained phrases like institutional knowledge, documented initiative, and the only person who filed an inspection. Report in the correct format. The raise was not transformative, it was a raise, which was different. A thing that mattered without changing everything, and Wesley had accepted it the same way. He did most things. Without performance, false modesty, just a handshake with Randall, and a notation in his work record, and then back to whatever was on the log that day. He told Lena about it over the phone that evening, matter-of-factly, the way he told her most things. Wesley, she said. It's fine news, he said. It's the right news. I've been doing the senior job without the title for 8 months. Say it's good news. He was quiet for a moment. Good news, he said. Was that so hard? Moderately, he said. She laughed. He heard Owen in the background asking something, and her answer patient, half distracted, the specific voice she used when she was trying to hold two conversations, and he listened to it, The way you listened to something that had become familiar enough to feel like it belonged to you a little bit, without fully belonging to you, which was exactly the right amount at exactly this point in things. What they had built over the months since January, since the battery in the parking garage, since Mila's direct question in the diner booth, since coffee with Daniel Marlowe on a neutral Saturday, was not a perfect thing. Wesley would have been suspicious of a perfect thing. He had learned from experience that the things that presented as perfect in the early stages were usually concealing the parts that would eventually be the actual problem. And he'd gotten old enough and tired enough to prefer a thing that was honestly imperfect from the beginning, because at least then you knew what you were dealing with. What they had was this: two schedules that were genuinely difficult to align. Because Lena's work did not respect evenings or weekends in the way that Wesley's generally did. There were weeks where she canceled plans twice in a row because of a client crisis or a board situation, or something that required her physical presence in a conference room at a time that had originally been earmarked for something else. Wesley didn't say much about it when it happened, which she had once, in a moment of defensive exhaustion, misread as indifference. And they'd had the conversation that needed to happen, not a fight exactly. A mutual clarification conduct at his kitchen table at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday after she'd canceled Thursday's pancakes for the second week in a row. Indifference, he said. I know what your work is. Why don't you ever say anything when I cancel? Because I know why you're canceling. You don't need me adding to it. She looked at him across the table. Sometimes I want to know it affects you. He thought about that. Why? Because if it doesn't affect you, then I'm the only one carrying this, and that's... She stopped. That doesn't feel right either. He understood that. The thing she was describing was not irrational. The fear that patience looked too much like not caring, that a person who never complained might not have anything to complain about losing. He'd felt versions of it himself in the Ursno warmth, when she was careful and composed, and he sometimes couldn't tell if he was reading warmth or a very skilled simulation of warmth. It affects me, he said. I look forward to Thursdays. You never say that. I'm saying it now. She looked at him, and the defensive exhaustion in her face settled into something quieter. Okay, she said. And when you cancel, I'd rather you cancel with a day's notice than show up running on empty, he said. Because the version of you that shows up when you've been in a conference room for 14 hours is not the version that's actually present. And I'd rather have Thursdays mean something than just happen. She was quiet for a moment. That's the most direct thing you've ever said to me about what you want. I've been working up to it. She almost smiled. How long? Few months. Wesley, I'm not a fast mover, he said. This I did, she said. It's fine. She stopped. I like that about you, actually. I just sometimes need you to be slow in a way that's visible. I'll work on it, he said. I'll work on the canceling, she said. Neither of them became perfect at their respective thing immediately, which was the correct outcome, because immediate perfection would have meant the conversation hadn't been real. But things shifted slightly in the way things shifted when two people made an honest agreement, not dramatically, not all at once, just incrementally in the direction of better. Travis Barlow left the hotel in June. He didn't get fired. He put in his notice and took a position at a larger property across town, which was a promotion or a lateral move, depending on who you asked, and which Wesley suspected was at least partly motivated by the accumulated discomfort of having to exist in the same building as the evidence that his Friday night joke had not played out as intended. Wesley heard about it from Derek, who had evolved from Travis's associate into a person who occasionally made genuine conversation with Wesley in the break room, perhaps having decided that his affiliation with the corner booth experiment was not the professional identity he wanted to carry. He's going to the Westover group, Derek said. More money, he says. Good for him, Wesley said, and meant it in the specific limited way that you meant something that was true but didn't require enthusiasm. Derek started. I mean, you don't care. Care about what happens in this building, Wesley said it. Travis Barlow doesn't happen in this building anymore. Derek nodded slowly. For what it's worth, the thing with the dinner. I knew it was wrong when we were doing it. I should have said something. Wesley looked at him. Derek was an ordinary man in his mid-30s who had made a small bad choice for the same reason, most people made small bad choices, because it was easier to go along with the thing than to interrupt it. And the cost of interrupting seemed too high in the moment, and the cost of going along seemed to be borne by someone else. Wesley knew that cost hadn't actually been borne by someone else. He also knew that Derek, standing in the break room saying, "I should have said something," was worth something, even if it was worth less than having said it at the time. Wesley said, "Say it next time." "Yeah," Derek said. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't a friendship. It was just two men in a break room, one of them trying to move slightly forward from something he'd done, the other one letting him do it without making it a bigger thing than it needed to be, which was its own kind of grace, not the dramatic kind, but the everyday kind that most of the actual repair work in any life required. Question of whether to move in together arrived in August, not as a proposal or a dramatic moment, but as a practical problem that surfaced in the middle of an ordinary evening. They were at Lena's apartment, a spacious place on the 14th floor of a building that had a doorman and heated parking, and more square footage than Wesley's entire floor at the hotel, which he had long since stopped registering as a contrast and simply registered as where Lena lived. Owen was asleep in his room. Mila was on the couch with a book she'd been reading for 3 weeks in the particular way she'd read books she's loved, which was slowly because she didn't want them to end. Wesley and Lena were at the kitchen island, with the debris of dinner between them and the comfortable low-energy presence of two people who had spent enough time together to exist in the same space without filling it. Lena had been looking at something on her laptop, a lease renewal notice for her apartment that she'd received that week and hadn't fully processed yet. She turned it toward Wesley. "They're raising the rent," she said. "Significantly." Wesley looked at the number. "That's significant. I've been thinking about whether it makes sense to stay." She closed the laptop. "Apartment is too much space for just us. Owen's room is the only room that's actually full. The other two are—" She made a small gesture. "Just rooms." "Where's this going?" he said. She looked at him. "I don't know yet. I'm thinking out loud." "Okay. I've been thinking about, practically speaking, what makes sense for us." She was using the careful voice, the one she used when she'd thought about something for a while and was uncertain how it would land. "Owen and Mila get along. You spend 3 or 4 nights a week here or at your place. Commute between our apartments is 20 minutes. Asked me last week if I was going to be at her birthday, which is in October." "She did? He hadn't known that." "She texted me," Lena said. "From your phone." She said, and I'm quoting, "It would be weird if you weren't there. Then she sent me a list of acceptable birthday cake flavors." Wesley looked at the kitchen island. "She sent you a list." Chocolate was ranked first. Lemon was ranked second, but with a note that it was for sophisticated palates, which she included herself in. He was quiet for a moment. "Then, what did you answer?" "I told her I would be there and that I had sophisticated palate opinions, and that lemon was excellent." She sent back a thumbs up. "And good choice." He was quiet again, but it was a different quality of quiet, the kind that held something in it. Something he was being careful with because it was good, and he'd learned to be careful with good things. "She's been asking me things about you," he said, casually. "Way she thinks she's being subtle." "What kind of things?" "Whether you like camping. Whether you think dogs or cats are better. Your favorite color is blue," Lena said. "Regular blue, not sky blue." "What about camping?" "I told her you'd probably figure it out if given sufficient equipment and a reasonable weather forecast." "That's accurate," she said. "That's very accurate." He turned his mug on the counter. "What are you actually asking me?" She looked at him. "I'm asking if it's time to talk about whether we're building something that should live in one." It was a direct question, which was how Lena asked the thing she actually wanted to know. And it deserved a direct answer, was how Wesley answered things he'd thought about sufficiently. He had thought about this so obsessively, in a way that ran ahead of where they actually were. But in the quiet way, he thought about structural things practically, honestly, with attention to what would actually hold and what might not. "Apartment is too small for 4 people, he said. "Your apartment has rooms you're not using, and a rent increase that doesn't make sense. Mila's in a good school district, on my end. Owen's school is closer to here." "I know all of this," she said. "I've been running the logistics." "Of course you have." he said. Is that annoying? He said. It's you. She looked at him with the expression that was still, after 8 months. The one he liked best, the one where she'd stopped managing and was just looking. The logistics are fine, he said. The logistics aren't the question. What's the question? He thought about how to say it in a way that was honest rather than just careful. Question is whether we're doing this because it makes practical sense or because it's what we actually want. Because I've made decisions that made practical sense before, and they were the wrong decisions because practical sense isn't the same thing as right. She was quiet for a moment. I want Owen to know what it looks like to be in a house where people are decent to each other, she said. Perfect. Decent. Where somebody shows up. When the car breaks down and somebody else makes the pancakes and nobody's keeping score and nobody is pretending. She looked at the closed laptop. He's 6. He still has time to learn what that looks like if someone shows him. Wesley thought about Mila, who was on the couch behind them with her book, and who had grown up without a mother's presence in ways that he'd tried to compensate for and couldn't entirely, who had taken to Lena with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who had needed something and recognized it when it arrived. I want Mila to know she's allowed to need people, he said. She's been watching me not need people for most of her life. I'm good at a lot of things. That's not one of them. Looked at him. So yes, he said. Not because of the rent. Because it's what we want. Yes, she said. From the living room. Mila's voice. Looking up from her book. Are you talking about moving in together? Wesley turned. Mila was reading with the focused innocence of someone who had definitely been listening. This is a kitchen island conversation, he said. The kitchen island is very close to the couch, Mila said. She looked up. Her expression was 8 years old and completely transparent. I think it's a good idea, she said. Owen and I already decided we'd share the big room if we had one. She went back to the book. For the record, Wesley looked at Lena. Lena looked at Wesley. They've been planning this longer than we have, she said. Apparently, he said. They moved in October, which was Mila's birthday month, which meant the moving happened in the constructive chaos of boxes and furniture alongside birthday party planning, which Mila had opinions about and Owen had logistical suggestions for, and which Lena managed with the competence of a woman who ran a 400-person company and found organizing a child's birthday party simultaneously more and less complicated than she expected. The apartment they found was on a good street in a neighborhood that sat between Wesley's old side of the city and Lena's, which felt right in a way that was more than symbolic. 4 bedrooms, 1 for each child, 1 for Wesley and Lena, one that became an office for Lena with a small workbench in the corner for Wesley's tools, because there was no basement, and he needed somewhere to work. And she had said without any hesitation that a workbench in the corner of an office was a completely reasonable thing. The Saturday they moved the last boxes in. They ordered pizza because neither of them had the energy to cook, and the kitchen wasn't fully organized anyway. They sat on the floor of the living room, all 4 of them. Because the couch hadn't been moved to its final position, eating pizza from the boxes and surrounded by the controlled mess of a life being assembled. Ate his pizza with systematic precision, 1 slice at a time, the corners first. Ate hers folded in half, which she had decided was the efficient method, and which she had demonstrated to Owen twice until he accepted it as information without committing to the technique. Is this our home now? Owen asked. Yes, Lena said. He looked around the living room, the boxes, the displaced furniture, the general sense of organized disruption. It doesn't look like a home yet. It will, Wesley said. How long does it take? Wesley thought about it. He thought about the apartment on Cardwell Street that Travis had mentioned as a pointed contrast, which he'd lived in for 6 years, and how it had looked like a home pretty quickly after Mila arrived. Because Mila had an instinct for putting her mark on spaces, drawings on the refrigerator, amber on the dresser, bell on the bedside table. He thought about what a home actually was, which was less about the physical arrangement and more about whether the people in it knew they were supposed to be there. As long as you'd think, he said. Yes, he'd intervened. Mila had already found the spot in the living room where the afternoon light came through the window, which she noted was excellent for reading, and had mentally designated it as hers. which Owen did not contest because he had already determined that the room with the north-facing window was better for his purposes because it was cooler and had fewer shadows, which was important for studying specimens. 7 and 9. Now, Owen had turned 7 in September, Mila had turned 9 in October, and they had evolved from the cautious diplomatic negotiation of their first pancake morning into something more like siblings, which was to say they argued about specific things with the comfort of people who knew they were stuck with each other and had decided that was fine. They were not identical. Mila was loud in her thinking, and Owen was quiet in his, and they had worked out an arrangement whereby Owen got final authority on topics pertaining to natural science, and Mila got final authority on everything else, which Owen had accepted because it left him the domain he cared about, and Mila had accepted because it gave her a large territory. After the pizza boxes were cleared and Owen was in his room, and Mila had claimed the reading spot with a book, and the lamp she'd immediately plugged into the nearest outlet, guessed it since then. Wesley and Lena sat against the wall of the living room in the way you sat when the couch was not yet in the right place, with the light from the kitchen making a warm square on the floor. "You're thinking about something," she said. "I'm thinking about Billionaire House," he said. She looked at him. "Tonight? Sometimes I think about it. Corner booth." He turned his water glass in his hand. What Travis thought was going to happen. He thought you'd feel small, and I'd feel embarrassed. He looked at the warm square of light on the floor. "And instead we're here." "Instead we're here," she said. He thought about what it cost to sit down at a stranger's table on a rainy Friday night when every reasonable instinct said to turn around. He thought about what it cost her to stay, knowing what the evening had been arranged to be. He thought about the specific ordinary courage of two people choosing not to let someone else's cruelty have the last word, not through grand resistance, but just through sitting down and having dinner. He was not someone who believed that everything happened for a reason. Too practical for that. Too familiar with the things that happened for no reason at all. The things that were simply hard and random and not instructive. But he believed in the choices people made in moments that mattered, the choice to sit instead of walk away, the choice to stay instead of leave, the choice to be honest when a managed version would have been easier and less interesting. Those choices were where the actual story was. Not in what happened to you, but in what you did when it happened. "I've been thinking about something," Lena said. "What? Way things work, the way people sort each other. By what they earn, what they own, what they're called at work." She looked at the light on the floor. Spent 12 years being sorted by one set of criteria. Spent your whole career being sorted by another. And somehow Travis Barlow, who sorted us both, ended up being the person who brought us into the same room. She paused. "There's something almost funny about that." "Almost," Wesley agreed. "To him," she said. "Definitely not to him," Wesley said. They were quiet together for a moment, the apartment settling around them with the new home sounds of a building, learning its occupants the particular creak of the floors, the way the heat came on. The slight draft from the window in the hallway that Wesley had already noted and would seal properly this weekend. "He said I'd still be fixing elevators," Wesley said. "Travis, that last night at Billionaire House. I remember. He meant it as the worst thing he could think of to say. The elevator at this building needs the east shaft serviced," Wesley said. "I noticed when we were moving boxes. The guide rails are worn. Somebody should put in a service request." Lena looked at him. "You looked at the elevator while we were moving." "I look at elevators," he said. "It's what I do." She started to say something and then stopped. And what came out instead was the real laugh, the one that couldn't be managed, and it filled the living room of the new apartment in a way that made it sound. Immediately, yes, like somewhere people lived. From Mila's corner, without looking up from the book. "What's funny?" "Adult things," Wesley said. "Adult things are never as funny as you think they are," Mila said. "She's not wrong," Lena said. Wesley looked at the horse drawing, which was one of the first things Mila had unpacked and taped to the wall near her reading spot. The purple horse from the gas station phase, slightly crinkled now from being folded and unfolded and moved twice, still exactly itself. Thought about the piece of amber on her dresser, Owen's fossilized shark tooth on his bookshelf, the level in Lena's toolbox. She had a toolbox now. A small one that Wesley had given her at Christmas, as a joke that was also not a joke, and the little syrup bottles at the diner that they still went to on Thursdays, all four of them, because Greta knew their orders, and the coffee was mediocre, and that had somehow become the point. He thought about what Travis Barlow had been trying to prove that rainy Friday night 11 months ago, that a man like Wesley wasn't worth the table, that a woman like Lena deserved better than what Wesley had to offer. The distance between their economic worlds was too wide to cross, and that anyone who tried would end up embarrassed on one side or the other. He was wrong about all of it. Not because the distance wasn't real, it was real, and they felt it sometimes in small ways. The moments when Lena's world asked things of her that his didn't intersect with, in the moments when his schedule ran on a different logic than hers. Yes, he'd intervened in the occasional awkward conversation at Lena's professional events where Wesley stood in a room full of people in the same economic stratosphere and nobody was cruel about it. But nobody quite knew what to do with him either, which he managed by being exactly who he was, which was ultimately the only tool he'd ever had for that particular situation, and the only one that actually worked. The distance was real. They crossed it anyway. Every day in small ordinary ways they crossed it. Was not nothing. That was in fact everything. What Travis had not understood, what a lot of people did not understand, Wesley thought, because it was harder to understand than it looked, was that dignity was not something you earned by reaching a certain income level or job title or square footage of living space. It was something you either had or you didn't, and it had nothing to do with the rest of it. Wesley had it. He'd had it fixing elevators on Cardwell Street. He had it here, on the floor of a new apartment with a woman he loved and two children who were already at home in a place that still had boxes in the corners. Yet yes, he'd intervened. What Lena had found, what she had been looking for, without quite knowing the shape of what she was looking for, was not a man without complications or a life without difficulty. It was a man who carried his difficulty honestly and didn't ask her to make it smaller or dress it up or pretend it wasn't there, who showed up in a parking garage in January with a wrench and his daughter's homework folder and no agenda except to fix the problem and go home, who said the hard thing at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday because it needed saying, and who didn't dress it up as more than it was. That was the thing Travis's $200 had never accounted for. Thing that couldn't be measured by job title or bank balance or any of the other markers Travis had laid out at that restaurant table, like evidence of a verdict already reached. The thing that was either there or it wasn't. It was there. Almost exactly a year after the promotion that was exactly the right promotion, Wesley took Lena back to Billionaire House. He didn't make an announcement about it or a thing of it, he just booked a table. The same table near the center of the room. Yes, he'd told her to stop at dinner on Saturday and not to wear anything that required a decision-making process, which was his way of saying the occasion was not the kind that required performance. She knew where they were going when the car turned onto that street. She didn't say anything. She just looked at the entrance and then at him with the expression that he had learned by now to read as the one where she was holding something carefully. Calvin Mercer was still the manager. He recognized them immediately, the kind of recognition that managers developed for situations that had been significant, the ones that stayed in the memory because they had required something from the room. He led them to the table himself. "Welcome back," he said, with the quiet sincerity of a man who understood what welcome back meant in this particular context. "Thank you," Lena said. The corner booth was occupied by a family, a grandmother, two parents, three children. The middle one drawing something on a napkin and had no significance beyond being a corner booth where people were having dinner, which was what it had always been, except for one Friday night 11 months ago, when it had been something else. They sat across from each other at the center table. The restaurant was warm and full, candles on every table, the same amber light that had been there the first time. Put her elbows on the table, which was not the posture she'd had the first time, and looked at him with the ease of someone who was exactly where they'd chosen to be. "The salmon is still good," she said. "It was always good," he said. "That the first time. I knew it by the end." She smiled. Not the composed one, not the practiced one, not the one she used in boardrooms or at Marcus Hale's type of event. The real one, which by now he knew as well as he knew anything. They ordered. They ate. They talked the way they talked comfortably, sometimes seriously, sometimes about nothing worth repeating and therefore worth everything. At some point during dinner, Lena said that Owen had submitted a report at school about the Cretaceous period that was technically longer than the assignment had called for, and his teacher had given him full marks and a note that said, "Excellent work. Please see me about appropriate length," which Owen had interpreted as encouragement. "He gets that from you," Wesley said. "The length or the not listening to limits? Probably," she said. Wesley looked at the restaurant around them, the tables, the other couples and families and groups of friends, the ordinary business of people having an ordinary evening, which was what this place was for on most nights, which was what it had been for on a rainy Friday night 11 months ago, when Travis Barlow had turned it into something else for about an hour before the room had the good sense to turn it back. The thing about humiliation, Wesley had come to understand, was that it required the target's cooperation. You had to accept the terms of it, had to agree that the thing being used against you was actually shameful, had to consent to being made small by someone else's measuring instrument. The moment you declined, not dramatically, not with a speech, just by staying in your chair and ordering the salmon, the humiliation had no place to go. It came back to the person who sent it. Travis had sent a lot out that night. It had all come back. "What are you thinking about?" Lena asked. "Travis," he said. "Tonight? Here. Sometimes." He looked at the table where the corner booth family was now involved in what appeared to be a mild disagreement about dessert. "Often. Just sometimes." "What do you think about him?" He thought about it honestly. "I think he was a man who measured himself by what other people didn't have. And that's a small way to live." A pause. "I also think he did us an accidental favor, and I'm not going to spend more than 5 minutes a year being grateful for it. 5 minutes is generous. I'm a generous person." She looked at him across the table, the candle between them, the restaurant full of its own life around them. And she said, "Yes, you are." It was not a complicated ending. There was no single moment that resolved everything, no dramatic turn that tied the loose ends into something clean. Life did not work that way, and they both knew it. They were too old and too tired of false versions to want it to work that way. There would be more difficult conversations. There would be more difficult conversations. There would be more weeks when the schedules didn't align, and more evenings when exhaustion made patience harder than it should be, and more moments when the differences between their worlds surfaced, in small uncomfortable ways that required attention. There would also be Thursday pancakes, mediocre coffee at Patty's that they kept drinking anyway, and Mila's reading spot by the window, and Owen's Stegosaurus napkins, the level in the toolbox, the horse drawing on the wall, and the elevator in their building that needed its east shaft serviced, which Wesley had already scheduled for the following Saturday morning. There would be the ordinary accumulation of days that were not individually remarkable, and that added up over time to something that was. Cruel bet had been placed on their failure. $200 on the certainty that a working-class man and a wealthy CEO could not belong together. That dignity was a function of income. That worth was a function of title. A man who fixed things for a living was not worth the table of a woman who ran things for a living. The bet was wrong, not because everything had worked out perfectly, and not because love had smoothed away the rough edges of reality, and not because the gap between their worlds had closed or been rendered invisible. The bet was wrong because it had been based on a misunderstanding of what actually mattered between two people, which was not what they owned or what they were called, but whether they were honest with each other, whether they showed up when it was inconvenient, whether they let the other person be exactly what they were without requiring improvement. Wesley Hart was still a maintenance technician who got up at 5:30 and drove a truck that smelled like Pine Air freshener and WD-40. He was also a man who slept fine, who had a daughter who corrected his pronunciation, and a woman beside him who knew the difference between sky blue and ocean blue and had a toolbox she was learning to use. Lena Marlowe was still a CEO who ran 400 people and attended meetings that took more than they gave. She was also a woman who drank mediocre coffee on Thursday mornings in a diner booth and had found, after years of being assessed and categorized and approached for what she owned, a person who looked at her and simply saw her. They left Bellmere House on a Saturday night in May, walked past the doorman and out into an evening that was warm. For the first time all year, genuinely warm, the kind that made you want to stay outside a little longer. They did stay outside a little longer. Nothing about their backgrounds had changed. Everything about their lives had. That was the story. That was all of it. And it was enough.